Terminator Dark Fate was directed by Tim Miller and marked the first time that James Cameron returned to production of any of the films in this franchise since Terminator 2 Judgment Day, despite being the original creator and director of that film and its predecessor. This film follows a future where Judgment Day didn't happen, and, when it was actually initially meant to, and Skynet was no longer an issue. However, there is a new threat on the horizon that essentially took Skynet's place, and now a soldier from the future has been augmented, must stop a Terminator who has time-traveled to kill a new version of John Connor, a new John Connor-like messiah for this new future, and she ends up being aided by an older and more grizzled Sarah Connor. I'll try to keep this intro short, but I'm definitely the cliche fan of the first two Terminator movies, and I don't know. The films in between T2 and this one were definitely mostly mediocre. I think I enjoyed the new take on Salvation, but outside of that, I remember thinking it was just mediocre as well. But I was really looking forward to this film when it came out, even though it had the same issue that Edge of Tomorrow and Gemini Man had, really stupid songs attached to the initial trailers. But anyway, before I get into my actual thoughts on the film, I first want to remind you guys to hit that like button, and also to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Also, as a very early warning, I will be touching on spoilers in this video, so be warned on the off chance that you have not seen the film and you still wish to. But also, it's been out for over a year. I think it's worthy of getting into spoilers, but I also want to be courteous just in case. Now, let's get into my review of Terminator Dark Fate. Both Linda Hamilton and Arnold Schwarzenegger give amazing return performances. Hamilton reminds us why she's so synonymous with the character of Sarah Connor, and I don't remember if I mentioned this later in the video, but I just want to go ahead and say it. This film remembered why the first two Terminators were so great, and it's not because of Arnold, it was because of Linda Hamilton. Nothing against Arnold because he's amazing, but Linda Hamilton is the heart of the franchise, or at least she was until they started changing things. But anyway, my whole point. She returns to this role after nearly 30 years, and she's still amazing. This version of Sarah is older, more grizzled than when we last saw her in 1991, and she's even got more of a bit comedic side, but they also don't shy away from the trauma that she has gone through since her last foray in the role. As for Arnold Schwarzenegger, this is the best that he's been in the role since T2, and that's because of what they did with this particular version of the T-800. So, this is where we're going to start getting into the spoilers, so like I said, final warning.
3, 2, 1.
So after this Terminator kills John Connor right after the events of T2, we see him raise a family, and having grown a cyborg version of a conscience, assists Sarah through text messages telling her when other Terminators are going to appear so that she can destroy them, giving her purpose. The text message part, though, isn't the most important part to me. The most important part that I focused on was the idea that a Terminator settled down into a human life after being abandoned in a time where he didn't exist, and ended up raising a family, owning a business. I really enjoyed how they conveyed all of this. It was just something that a lot of people seem to not enjoy, but I personally did. It was f***ing interesting just hearing him explain it to everyone. But also, the absolute best part about his T-100 in this film, I'm sure you've already noticed that he's my favorite aspect in the film, hands down, since I'm talking about him so much, but he is so f***ing funny. The first time I watched this film, I wasn't expecting to have a full belly laugh anywhere in the entire thing, but surprisingly, I had multiple with Schwarzenegger's deadpan delivery. Just rewatching the film, I had to pause multiple times just so I could finish laughing and still be able to comprehend what the fuck was going on in the story. And hearing Schwarzenegger's dry deadpan way of explaining the importance of drapes in a room and how, and, things like that, and this is a direct quote, hold on. The texture, the weight of the material, one wrong choice can destroy the entire look. Okay, God damn it. I sounded like a Russian, but yeah, he just says the weight, the texture, one wrong choice can destroy the look of the entire room, and it's just in his normal deadpan way. It's fucking hilarious hearing this from a robot. His name is Carl, and he does drapes. As for newcomers, we have Mackenzie Davis, Gabriel Luna, and Natalia Reyes. First, we have Davis, who was the primary focus of the marketing after Hamilton and Schwarzenegger, of course. But she plays Grace, an augmented human who is basically the stand-in for Kyle Reese. Luckily, with the performance and the writing, she never falls into that box where she would have just been another Reese clone. And Gabriel Luna plays the antagonist, a new cyborg called the Rev 9. There are admittedly times where his Terminator comes across as a Robert Patrick wannabe, but Gabriel Luna is extremely believable. He's not given enough outside of being an unstoppable opposing force. Actually, I probably should have turned this into a con. I honestly wasn't planning on counting it, but actually saying these things out loud, okay, yeah, no, I really need to. Here's the next point. The Rev 9 is definitely intimidating, and they prove that he is a force to be reckoned with, but honestly, I had two main issues with the cyborg. The first issue was involving the use of him as an action-oriented character. He's given a new ability that we haven't seen before in this universe. Not only is the liquid metal kind of reminiscent of Robert Patrick's T-1000, or the one from T3, or Terminator 3, I don't remember what the fuck that one was called. But the difference between him and past cyborgs is that he can separate himself into two unique autonomous cyborgs. On the surface, that's interesting and could lead to some interesting sequences or uses in general, but they never really do anything with it. They never try to do anything clever with the ability. You just sit there and think, okay, moving on. As for the second issue, this cyborg has no personality. Now, the original Terminator from 1984 didn't have a personality. That was on purpose. He was treated more as a horror movie monster, which made sense in context. But then when you get to T2, we get Robert Patrick's T-1000. One of the big differences between the two, besides abilities, which is the most obvious, is that the T-1000 is an infiltration model. He is built to seem more human even if he's not. What holds the T-1000 above the Rev 9 is how much screen time is given to make the former look like a human in society. Like, they make it to where he looks and feels like a human. When I was a kid, I rented T2 shortly after I had seen the Terminator for the first time, and I legitimately thought that Arnold was the antagonist again, and that Patrick was just another Reese equivalent. This was a big plot twist for me, and it really showcased just how good they made his character at infiltrating. And anyway, my whole point with Dark Fate is that we don't get extended sequences where we see him being an infiltrator like we did with Patrick, but his character it just felt like he was essentially a Robert Patrick clone in use. However, there was one small scene closer to the end where he seemed to be a bit more self-aware than the prior antagonists that have been in the other past films, or at least a couple of them. And instead of just being an antagonist with one goal and that's it, there's actually a point where he slows down and questions things. He looks at Carl and questions, why are you helping these people? You don't really have any true stake in this fight, and, you know, you're also a cyborg like me. Why are you resisting with them? Why aren't you either helping me or just getting out of the way? I don't see Patrick Cyborg ever doing that kind of thing, and I know that he didn't in the film, not even anything close. So seeing more things like that could have been interesting as well, but it's just a moment that lasts for less than a minute, and then it's back to fighting. And so that I don't forget our third newcomer, we have Natalia Reyes, who plays Danny, the girl that Grace has to protect. Automatically, she's shown as a meld of Sarah and John being more self-sufficient and strong-willed than John ever was, especially when we first met him. And honestly, Danny's an okay character. I mean, they do a good enough reason to show her being strong-willed, but other than that, like, that's pretty much it. It's just, like, baseline. First off, if you guys have been with me for a while, you know that I like bitching, especially if the visual effects aren't good. and I bitch a lot about de-aging. I'm gonna bitch about the de-aging here. There are 3 instances of de-aging in this film. The first that's shown off is with Sarah, who looks exactly as she did in the 90s. In the first shot, I thought, damn, this is really good. And then she moves, and then the uncanny valley shows up, and I wanted to hurl at how jarring it was. But I wasn't ready for John Connor. Oh no. Oh god, I was not ready for John. That was some of the worst de-aging I've seen up to this point. And just rewatching it, it was even worse than I remembered. God, it was awful. And then you had Arnold de-aged, which looks slightly better than the other 2, but not enough. But honestly, outside of that, the overall visuals were fine. The Rev 9 looked good. Arnie, whenever you saw the medal on him looked good. The future scenes looked good. Most everything just looked good. The action sequences are well-helmed and are at least pretty fun to watch, but each one oddly feels manufactured, especially when compared to the first Terminator films. Even when you can tell that parts of the sequences were not just added in CGI, it was practical effects, it still has that manufactured Hollywood look that tends to be distracting if the sequences aren't absolutely amazing. It just, everything had a glossy sheen over it. I enjoyed the story altogether. I understand why people didn't like it and they just saw it as a rehash of T2. But really, in basic terms, T2 was a rehash of the first film. The basic plot is the same as it is with every Terminator film. Ordinary humans must survive against and battle a robot from the future while being aided by a protector from that future. But the brilliance of James Cameron was to take a basic premise and make it the same, but change the parameters. He also did that with Aliens compared to Alien, but that's a story for another time. Just like this overall story is mostly made for a future review of both the Terminator and T2 Judgment Day for me. Anyway, yes, the idea is the same, but they play around with the formula. We see a future where the Skynet future never actually happened, but a new one took its place that's similar, because, you know, you can't stop dumbasses from trying to create AI that just ends up gaining sentience and trying to kill off humanity for some reason. And I like what they added with it. I like the Terminator who raises a family and sells f***ing drapes. I like the future Messiah kind of being a mixture of Sarah and John as far as destinies and mindsets go. I like the idea of augmented humans, which makes sense as far as giving humans, or at least humans in the future, an edge in battle against the robots. I like that kind of stuff. And sure, I'll admit that the shtick of Projector from the future coming to protect a future Messiah is tiresome, but at least they try to divert from it as much as possible without going the Terminator Salvation route. And there are definite times, or there are definite, like, time travel issues, especially involving the fact that Carl killed John after Skynet was wiped from existence, and it's never really explained why he's still around, let alone how he was around then. They could have at least explained possibilities of why, and maybe that things don't work like Back to the Future, where things are just wiped out as though there never existed. But maybe it's like Avengers Endgame, where instead new timelines and universes are created, multiverses and I mean, it would have possibly been convoluted outside of theories in the film, but it still would have looked like they were trying to answer the question, as ambiguous as it would have been, but it's simply ignored. And all of those points that I made led me to this final thought process. Terminator Dark Fate is, in my opinion, the best Terminator film since T2. We get a pretty good story that tries its own thing. We get a new cast of characters that are really good, but they're definitely outshined by the veterans. I really enjoyed this movie. I recommend it highly, and with that, my review ends here. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening to my thoughts on this particular film. I sincerely appreciate it. I am not good with English. Once again, don't forget to hit that like button, and also hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And as always, farewell until the next video, all of you casual moviegoers and movie fans alike, and keep on being awesome, my friends.